Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. It is a big honor to be with a top-notch scholar of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the person of Professor Schiffman. Aside from being a professor at New York University, he is also an acclaimed author of scholarly books, Reclaiming the Dead Sea Scrolls, Understanding Second Temple and Rabbinic Judaism, and Qumran and Jerusalem. I would like to thank Professor Schiffman for his generosity. Despite his busy schedule, he gave us time to be with him and help us explain this very important topic related to our study of the sacred scriptures. The discussion may not be long, but it can be a great help in our studies and research ventures. Our topic is focused on the importance of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the light of textual variants in the Masoretic text and the Septuagint. Before 1947, the only Hebrew Bible text available was the text copied by the Masoretes in the Middle Ages. It was mostly a good copy, well preserved from one textual form of its book, but like all manuscripts, it had numerous errors and additions. The scriptural manuscripts among the Dead Sea Scrolls preserve many superior readings, many of which clearly showed the reasons behind the errors or additions and allowed us to correct many readings in our Bible. But before we start, I would like to welcome our friend, Professor Schiffman.
It's great to be with you today and say hello to new friends in the Philippines and, of course, to one old friend, Duane Cartujano, with whom I've been having the opportunity to correspond for years now about matters of common interest regarding the Bible, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and Septuagint, and things around it. One of the things that I think is very important about his work is that he has for years been bringing understanding of issues pertaining to the Bible and its history to many people, and also his wonderful work in interfaith relations. These are all very important. Besides my being involved in scholarship, I have the chance to be a member of a committee that represents the Jewish people to the Vatican and to some other international religious groups. And I think that we really are living in an era in which many of us, hopefully most of us, have come to understand that there's much more which connects us than what separates us. And this has always been sort of behind my correspondence with Duane, the issues that he's raised, the stuff that we're talking about. Unfortunately, I've never been to the Philippines, but I hear it's a beautiful place and a lot of nice people. I'd love to come to visit sometime. Who knows, maybe it'll happen. But at least now, with the help of video and some, let's say, good friends, we have the chance to get together, even if it's not really in person. So I hope this will be an opportunity to do that. I want to also just say as a little introduction that one of the things that I found over the years is that the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Bible, have made me friends all over the world. My wife actually jokes that we only visit places where they have conferences on the Dead Sea Scrolls. I don't know that there's been one in the Philippines, but I simply say that it's interesting how the Bible and our interest together binds us together and brings us together. And so I think it's a wonderful opportunity. It's like sort of as if you're sitting in my study in New York now, and I'm sitting in your homes in the Philippines, and we're all together talking about matters that are really important to us and in which we share a great interest. So I hope that we will have a good conversation here, and I thank Duane also again for these efforts and many other efforts.
Thank you so much, Professor Schiffman. So, we have two questions that need to be answered. So the first question is, why are the Dead Sea Scrolls considered a treasure, and how important are they to dedicated Bible students and to those interested in studying the sacred scriptures?
The Dead Sea Scrolls are an amazing treasure that we have. anybody who really wants to study the Bible, early Judaism, early Christianity has to look at the scrolls. Let's understand, first of all, what's in the scrolls as a background to this. There are basically three kinds of things in the collection of scrolls. We have about 900 scrolls, but almost all these scrolls are really fragmentary. They're just pieces of what were scrolls in ancient times. Now, if you take a look at the collection, it's about 1/3 manuscripts of the Hebrew Bible, except for the book of Esther, which is not there. Some people think it's coincidence. Some people think that it wasn't accepted by the Dead Sea Scrolls sectarians. But at any rate, all the rest of the Hebrew scriptures, what's known as the Old Testament. Now then we have 1/3, which are books about the Bible, like the Bible. They're sort of like the apocryphal books that are in the Catholic Bibles. Then we have a third kind, which is the literature of the Qumran sectarians. Now when we look at this whole thing, it becomes apparent that we have a massive source for the religious history and religious ideas in that very important time between Hebrew scriptures and, on the one hand, the rabbinic tradition in Judaism, and on the other hand, the rise of Christianity. So clearly, this is really significant stuff. Now let's take a look at the three different groups of texts. First of all, Hebrew scriptures. These are the earliest texts of the Bible that we have. You could read a book of Deuteronomy from before the time of Jesus. This is a wonderful opportunity to see what's in these manuscripts. But as we're going to be talking about as well, there is a problem because sometimes these manuscripts have textual variants. And these textual variants, they testify to the history of the text as it was being passed down in ancient times. And then the second group of texts are texts that are about the Bible, like the Apocrypha. In fact, some of them are the same books. There's a little bit of Ecclesiasticus, which is also known as Ben Sira. There are other books there. Now, these books tell us what Jews were thinking in the immediate pre-Christian era. Now, what's really interesting about these books is that they were widespread in the country, as we know, because some of them were found at Masada, where they had the last battle of the Jewish revolt against Rome that unfortunately led to the destruction of the temple in 70. And Masada was destroyed in 73. It was the last fighting of rebels against Romans. But anyhow, they had some of the very same texts. And these texts tell us so much about the religious ideas, about questions of good and evil, the Messiah, theology, Jewish law, all kinds of things. Then we get to the third group of manuscripts. These are the manuscripts from the people we call the Dead Sea sectarians. Most scholars think they're identical with a group known as the Essenes. Whether that's true or not isn't really important for what we're talking about. But these texts have attacks, what we call polemics, against other Jewish groups at the time. And between what they say about themselves and what they say about these other groups gives us a tremendous amount of new information about what was going on in the Jewish community at that time in terms of ideas and beliefs of Jews. But we have to remember that this group that have sometimes admittedly some strange ideas, along with some very beautiful ideas, this group did not really seem to have a continuation. When Rabbinic Judaism became the standard after the destruction of the temple in 70, and when Christianity came to the fore, the crucifixion about 30 or so, and then certainly flourishing when the Gospels were being put together, what's going on here is a rejection of the sectarian ideology of the group that gathered the Dead Sea Scrolls by both the early Christians and the early rabbis. And there are a lot of reasons for this. But basically what the scrolls tell us about is the debating and the arguing that was going on in the Jewish community about ideas during the period before the rise of Christianity and before the solidification of Rabbinic Judaism. So if you want to know about the Hebrew Bible, you want to know about the text of the Bible, you want to know about the background, Christianity, and the developments in Judaism, you've got to read these texts. Now, they're very hard and they're very fragmentary, and that's why scholars debate about them so much, but that's part of the fun. Studying the Dead Sea Scrolls is a lot of fun, but I think you really need to look at them. You really need to know something about them if you really want to understand what's going on in Judaism in what we could call the pre-Christian era, the Second Temple period. And without that, you're missing a tremendous amount. Now, for the Bible, there's also a lot of Bible interpretation there. Some of it is interpretation, which is, let's just call it what we call interpretation. How do we understand the Bible? Some of it is the sectarian polemic of the actual Dead Sea sectarians, and some of that bends the Bible in ways that maybe we don't agree with. But we get the idea of how some Jews were thinking and how they were opposing other Jews in the early Christian period. And all of this, from the point of view of early Christianity and New Testament, shows us something very important, that ultimately Christianity does originate as a sect within the Jewish community, and then for a whole variety of reasons get separated. So I would say the scrolls are really a great resource, and you should be studying the Dead Sea Scrolls if you want to know about this period. It's really important material. And I think this unbelievable treasure was given to us by a series of events that took place and coming to us so soon after the rise of the state of, actually being discovered right before the state of Israel, coming to the fore right with the discovery of the state of Israel, with the founding of the state of Israel. These are just some of the wonderful modern events that have been taking place in literally in our times. So I would say they're really important and a great treasure.
Thank you for your enlightening answers, Professor Schiffman. The Dead Sea Scrolls are the oldest, most authentic, and closest to the original witness to the state of the original text of the Bible. Before the Dead Sea Scrolls, our oldest Hebrew manuscript of the Hebrew Bible was from 10th century AD. And the oldest manuscripts of full Septuagint were from 4th and 5th centuries AD. The Hebrew and Greek biblical manuscripts of the Dead Sea Scrolls date back to the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, back when the texts were still in their formative stages. They are by far the closest we can get to the original Word of God. Also, they show us how the various books were composed and developed. The books of the Bible were produced by subsequent generations from at least as early as 7th century BC, developing by additional insights, commentaries, etc., all the way up to the late 1st and early 2nd century AD. The Dead Sea Scrolls show earlier and later editions of several of the books, sometimes showing corrections or additions. For example, in Isaiah chapter 3, verses 17 to 18, in the line 2, as we can see, in the line 2 from the top, the Hebrew word Adonai is written, then the scribal dots, the 4 dots, mean to remove it and replace it with tetragrammaton or yud hey vav hey. And then in the next line, the tetragrammaton or yud hey vav hey is written, then the scribal dots mean to remove it and replace it with Adonai. Also, many recent Bible translations use the Dead Sea Scrolls to correct errors in the traditional Hebrew text or the Masoretic text. There are many recently published Bibles revised, such as New American Bible Revised Edition, New Revised Standard Version, and others, because the Dead Sea Scrolls help correct difficult words, typos, etc. The New American Bible Revised Edition and New Revised Standard Version seriously used the Dead Sea Scrolls in their revised translations. So, let's proceed to the second question. how did the Dead Sea Scrolls give light to the textual variants in the Septuagint and the Masoretic text?
We want to explain how it can be that the Septuagint, the Greek Bible, has variant texts with the Masoretic Hebrew Bible, that is the one used in the Jewish community. And we want to explain how, because we now have the Dead Sea Scrolls, we can much better understand what's going on. So we have to realize that when the Septuagint was translated, beginning of the 3rd century BCE in Alexandria, the texts that the Septuagint used were slightly different in the actual Hebrew text than the one that we use in the Jewish community, which is called the Masoretic text, the one that was passed down. That's what it literally means. Now, when the scrolls were discovered and all the biblical manuscripts were checked out, it turned out that there were a small number of scrolls, generally we understand it to be about 15, where these texts had a Hebrew text that showed us that some of the variations of the Septuagint came from varying Hebrew texts. Now, this is not always the case. There are variants in the Septuagint which are interpretations, and there are variants that are simply errors. But there are some places where the Septuagint differs from the Masoretic text, and this difference is a result of having had a different Hebrew text, as we now can understand from looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls. This also reflects on a different problem, because some of the verses quoted in the New Testament are not the same as the way they are quoted in the Masoretic text. Now, sometimes this has to do with adaptations of the verses by the authors of the New Testament books, but it may also have to do with the fact that they were working with Hebrew Bible texts which were at some variation from those of the Hebrew Bible. Now, we have to understand one thing about all these variations, because now, when we look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, we can see some of these variations, and in fact, some that aren't in the Septuagint, in Hebrew text, when we realize that a lot of minor variants exist between the Hebrew Dead Sea Scrolls and the regular Masoretic Bible used in the Jewish community. Now, what we learn from the biblical Dead Sea Scrolls is that in actuality, a lot of differences that have nothing to do with the meaning and don't change anything in the Bible. I always joke and say, you're not going to find thou shalt steal. It's still going to say, you may not steal. But nonetheless, we now know that some variations that exist between the Septuagint, or for that matter, other sources, and the traditional Hebrew result from there having been some variations in some Hebrew texts that were translated or interpreted in ancient times. I hope that's clear. It's a difficult question, but it's just another one of those great examples where the fact that we have the Dead Sea Scrolls makes a big difference for our understanding of the history of the Hebrew Bible and how we ended up with the Hebrew Bible. It's called the Old Testament in Christianity, with that section of the Bible having some variations. Now, it doesn't mean that all variations, again, represent an original Hebrew text. And we want to emphasize something very important. When a text is a variant from the standard text, it doesn't make it correct and it doesn't make it better. Every textual reading, as we call them, has to be investigated on its own to determine, first of all, what is the evidence for that reason, the evidence for that reading, and how does that evidence stack up with other types of readings that are available to us. But this gets to a big point that we learn from the scrolls. We learn from the scrolls that the solidification of the Hebrew Bible that we're used to was something that seems to have happened after the Dead Sea Scrolls, but before the other two collections that we have. The collection from Masada, where you had the rebels' last stand in the revolt of the Jews against Rome from 66 to 73 CE, and the collection of materials left by rebels who actually were refugees during the second revolt, the Bar Kokhba revolt against Rome of 132 to 5 CE. And when we look at those texts, it's clear to us already that the rabbinic standard of standardization has taken place. And we, by that time, have only what we call as scholars Proto-Masoretic text, which means the text of the Masoretic text, similar to what we have later on. The entire set of variations seems to go away by the time we reach the mid-1st century CE. All of the other variations can only be recovered from Dead Sea Scrolls manuscripts, Septuagint versions, some variations in the New Testament or in rabbinic literature. But it seems to us that in the Jewish community, the basic text of the Masoretic text had become completely ascendant and completely authoritative, certainly by the end of the 1st century CE. I hope this is helpful for a very complex issue, and I tried to say it a couple of times so that everybody would be able to figure out what I meant, and so let's all just hope that it made sense and that this helps you. Okay, so I wish everybody again the best, and I'm glad to share the discussion of the Bible with you and to see so much interest in biblical studies. Thank you.
Thank you for your explanation, Professor Schiffman. We will show some examples of textual variants through the Masoretic text and the Septuagint. First example, in Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 1 of the Masoretic text, we can read the Hebrew words, Vayelech Moshe Vaydaber, meaning, and Moses went and spoke. While in the Septuagint, we can read the Greek words, Kai sunitilisin Moises lalon. And in the Qumran text, we can read the Hebrew words, Vikal Moshe lidaber. The Greek Septuagint agrees with the Qumran text against the Masoretic text in Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 1. When these were translated into English, both the Qumran text and the Septuagint say, and Moses finished speaking. With the emergence of the Dead Sea Scrolls, this verse was clarified and the correct text was established. The Qumran and the Masoretic text would be analyzed as Kal converted imperfect third person masculine singular. So no difference in the verbal analysis. Just a transposing of the two consonants, and so two different verbal analysis. The error in the Masoretic text is very clear. The lamed and the kaf are reversed. For the information of everyone, the transposing or switching of consonants is a common unintentional scribal error in the copying of one scroll to another. Another example, in the Masoretic text of 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 23, we can read the Hebrew words, Yakim Adonai et Divaro, meaning, may the Lord establish His word. While in the Septuagint, we can read the Greek words, to exelton ecto stomatoso. And in the Qumran text, we can read the Hebrew words, Yakim Adonai hayotse mepika. When these were translated into English, both the Qumran text and the Septuagint say, may the Lord bless what goes out of your mouth. Now, as you can see, the first word somewhat damaged, but the last letter of the first word is the second he of tetragrammaton. So, the full restored text is, Ak Yakim Adonai hayot semepika bativis haisya. So, the Qumran text the Qumran text conforms to earlier story. It is Hannah who made promise Samuel to God in the very same words in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 27 to 28. While the Masoretic text is unclear, it seems that Hannah has been replaced with Elkanah as elsewhere in the context. Another example. In Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 43, as you can see, the Masoretic text apparently lose some lines by error. The scribe's eye skipping from one line to the next. In the Masoretic text, the poem concludes with an invocation calling upon the nations to rejoice with God for his punishment on Israel's enemies. While, on the other hand, according to additional columns of verse 43, found only in the Qumran text and the Septuagint, the heavens and divine beings are called upon to rejoice with God. The best preserved text is Porcio, or the Qumran text. And the Greek Septuagint was clearly copied from a good text like Porcio. Well, brothers and sisters, we tried to present a good discussion despite the limited time. To all of you watching and listening to this discussion, I hope you have learned many things. May the merciful Lord continue to watch over us during this pandemic. Amen.
Mga hinigugma ko nga utod kay Kristo. Ang 2020, isa ka halandumon nga tuig para sa aton tanan. Bangod sa mga pag-antos nga aton nadagatan nga gindala sang pandemya nga COVID-19. Apang sa pihak nga bahin, ang tuig 2020 nangin makahulugan man para sa aton tanan bangod sang pagsaulog sang Year of Ecumenism, Interreligious Dialogue, and the Indigenous Peoples nga may tema paghambalanay padulong sa paghangpanay. Diri sa aton probinsya sang Capiz, nagtinguha kita sa pagululupod bisan makadali lamang sang nagligad nga January 21, 2020. Luyag ugid kamo tanan pasalamatan labi na gid sa inyo maayo nga mga tinutuyo kag pagpasap sa mga hilikuton nga ginpangunahan ni Brother Duane Cartujano sa radyo kag iban pa. Kabay nga magpadayon ini nga grasya sang Dios. May mga madamo pagitakuntan nga mga plano sa paghiliupod apang nautod ini tanan bangod sang pandemya. Ayhan may plano ang Diyos para sa atong tanan. Ang paghambalanay o dialogue, isa gid ka importante nga bahin sa aton pagtuo kag pagkabuhi, labi na gid sa tunga sang pandemya. Wala sing may pinilian ang COVID-19. Nagdala ini sang halit sa madamo naton nga mga kauturan. Himol, manggaranon, lamharon, o kunti kulang man. Kag wala man ini sing may ginpili nga relihiyon. Sa tunga sang pandemya, aton man nakita na ang aton mga kakulangan, labi na gid sa mga tinion nga madamo ang mga ginagutom, nadulaan sang pangabdian kag puluyan. May mga kauturan man kita nga nadulaan sang paglaom. Kag diri, nagasulod ang aton pagbuyluganay bilang mga Kristiyano, bilang mga sumunod ni Kristo, nga hindi kita dapat magpabilin sa aton pagpaiya-iya ukol pagkabuhi nga walay pagpasilabot sa isa kag isa. Gani nagalaom man ako nga paagi sa aton pagululupod kag paghangpanay, malutos naton ang COVID-19 kag ang iya sini nga halit sa aton mga kauturan. Paagi sa paghambalanay sa isa kag isa, aton man ginapakita ang pagpangibabaw kag ang pagkamadinalagon sang aton pagsalig kag paglaom sa Ginoo, nga amo ang nagatawag sa aton sa paghilugyon. Gintugyanan kita sang Ginoo sang isa ka misyon, nga amo ang pagbantala sang maayong balita sa bilog nga kalibutan. Kabay nga magpadayon ini sa aton mga katilingban kag sa aton mga kabuhi. Suguman, kinapasalamatan ko ang inyong pagpanginbulahan sa kaangtanan sang pagpili sa akon nga kardinal sang simbahan. Wala ko ini ginakabig nga isa kadungog para sa akon lamang, kundi para sa aton tanan. Kag suguman isa ini kabugay kag panghangkat sa pag-alagad pagid sa tanan, labi na gid sa Dios nga amo ang nagpili sa akon bilang isa ka kubos niya nga alagad. Kabay pang iya kita tanan, bendisyonan.